water as an element is generally associated with things like healing, the emotions, intuition, mysticism, spirituality, going deep. Also, sometimes the tides, these up and down, these waves, and sort of a struggle sometimes with boundaries. Welcome to Prometheus Astrology. My name is Alina, and I am the astrologer for creatives and change makers with a physics BS from Yale. Today, we're talking about the elements, and specifically water as an element, and what it means in astrology, the water signs, all of that. So if you are a Pisces, Scorpio, or a Cancer, keep watching. Why is it important to talk about water generally? Well, I think that it's quite important for us to understand the core qualities underlying each of the zodiac signs. This way, when we make our delineations, we are able to connect what we're seeing in people to some core underlying principle. And if you aren't doing that, if you aren't able to say, oh, this is the watery nature of Cancer, oh, this is the cardinal nature of Aries, then you run the risk of just stereotyping people and accumulating data based on your personal experience, which may or may not actually be related to the sign itself if you don't know the core qualities that make up the zodiac signs. So the core qualities of the zodiac signs are the element, quadruplicity, which is whether or not the sign is cardinal, fixed, or mutable, the gender, the planetary ruler, and the symbol, like the constellation associated with each sign. So I have a video on each of those qualities. So if you want to take a deeper dive into the planetary ruler, gender, quadruplicity of anything, you can do that with me. And I recommend that you do for whatever sign it is that you're interested in. That way you get a really strong sense for each of these core principles. So as a Hellenistic astrologer, I'm really interested in the ancient understandings and conceptions of things. So you might also find it interesting to note that these qualities, the elements, were not actually assigned to the zodiac until maybe around like the 1st to the 4th century CE, whereas the zodiac itself is about 4,000 plus 4,500 years older than that. So the most ancient, original, oldest artifact that we have that we can date to the zodiac is the ancient Egyptian decan scheme, which breaks up the zodiac into 3 pieces. So each zodiac sign is broken into thirds. So then there's 36 different decans in the zodiac. So you may be a Cancer, but which version of Cancer? The first part of Cancer, the middle of Cancer, or the end of Cancer? So you would look at the degree that your Cancer sun, for instance, is in to know what the specific type of Cancer that you are as. And where the assignment for the elements to the zodiac came from does actually have a rationale, which is fascinating, that relates to the planetary joy scheme, but that is more than I have time to get into today, so probably a different video for that one, which is super interesting. So let me know in the comments if that sounds interesting to you. So water, what does water represent in astrology and in general? Because you may know that there are elements in many different wisdom traditions, in yoga, in Chinese medicine, in tarot and Native American traditions. There are many different cultures that use elements, and they usually have pretty similar symbolism behind them, which I think is super fascinating. So water as an element is generally associated with things like healing, the emotions, intuition, mysticism, spirituality, depth, going deep. Also, sometimes the tides, these up and down, these waves, and sort of a struggle sometimes with boundaries. Water, of course, takes the shape of the container that it's in, so it doesn't on its own create boundaries. It just is formless. And so sometimes there can be this quality of empathy and compassion associated with water, but then also sometimes struggle to separate self and other and set up strong emotional boundaries. So each element has a cardinal, fixed, and mutable version of it. So whether or not it's at the beginning cardinal of a season, fixed middle of the season, or mutable end of the season. So Cancer is our cardinal water sign, Scorpio is our fixed water sign, and then Pisces is our mutable water sign. So I'm going to get into each of those now and what represents their watery nature. Starting with Cancer. So Cancer, at the beginning of summer, our summer solstice sign, ruled by the moon, which is also the most watery planet and the only sign that the moon rules. The sun and the moon only rule one sign. All of the other planets rule 2 signs. So Cancer is truly the moon goddess. Cancer is the mother, the healer. Cancer, therefore, tends to be very emotionally supportive, tends to be very nurturing, very much caretaking, and is also the crab. So I think of Cancer's superpower as creating containers of emotional safety, where the ocean is vast. Emotions can be overwhelming. And Cancer, as a crab, has this shell that's able to kind of create structure and form and protection around someone or something. And this is where the healing power comes from too, to allow that protective space to heal emotionally. Cancer can be very protective, especially about the family and their loved ones. The crab has these pinchers. It is ready for battle. And another thing about being a shelled sea creature, so although the general inclination and impulse for Cancer is going to be to protect, to nurture, to caretake, to support, all of that giving energy, the luminaries, their function is basically to say yes. So the sun and the moon are the luminaries, opposite to Saturn in the zodiac. So the Saturn ruled signs are always opposite to the sun and moon ruled signs. So Saturn as a function is sort of to say no as a planet. That's what it generally does in your chart and to the other planets that it relates to. But the luminaries are sort of functioning to say yes. And whereas Leo is yes to the self, Cancer is yes to others. And so Cancer, although it is very also cardinal, interested in influencing in an emotional way, trying to bring those emotionally healing experiences and influence the environment in an emotional way, although it has that inclination and tendency, Cancer as a crab also does need to kind of retreat into its shell and have its own time to just be alone and kind of recuperate. And that'll be really important for Cancer people usually. So you'll find them either like loving hard on their people and creating containers of emotional safety, nurturing, caretaking, cooking, protecting, serving, or recovering, recuperating on their own, taking care of themselves and making sure they have their alone time to really be in their own energy again. That's usually something that's important for Cancer people too. So another thing about being a sign ruled by the moon is famous for waxing and waning, having these cycles. So for a water sign, emotionally, this can sometimes indicate emotional volatility, having some real highs and some real lows, and being a little bit all over the place with the emotions, sometimes here and then there. And that can be a little bit challenging for the people who are lovers of Cancer sometimes. And again, that struggle with boundaries can be real for Cancer as well. And, you know, the shadow side of Cancer, so this cardinal water, this inclination to influence emotionally their environment, is when it is in a good position, oriented towards healing and growth and support and nourishment, but it can also be negative. Sometimes Cancer, if it is pressed, under stress, will also do this in a very sometimes toxic way of really inflicting quite negative emotional experiences, and are able to do that quite well as well. So it's not always necessarily positive depending on how the Cancer is doing in that moment. Another thing about the crab, of course, is that they walk sideways. So sometimes Cancer can struggle with being quite direct, especially when it comes to setting boundaries or saying no. Cancer can be quite passive in the way that they get things done. And it can be very uncomfortable for them to just come forth directly and state the needs or desires in that moment. And as a water sign, Cancer will generally have a very strong intuition, very much in tune with the feelings and aware of feelings in themselves and others. Can sometimes be spiritual or mystical or kind of interested in the numinous and really going deep with people emotionally as well. And then Scorpio. Scorpio is our fixed water sign. So fixed water, I think of as like ice, right? Or the iceberg. So Scorpio is very different. Scorpio is ruled by Mars, and an iceberg is very different from a river. You know, cardinal water, you could think of flowing forwards, right? Like a river. This ecosystem, this habitat, riparian habitat is extremely lush and life-giving oftentimes. Now, an iceberg is quite threatening and dangerous. And, you know, something about it is that it's famously much more than initially meets the eye. The bulk of the iceberg is underneath the ocean, right? So they go down deep, and they go down deep and dangerous. You don't want to run into them. So Scorpio is a sign ruled by Mars, which is our planet of war, aggression, violence, the warrior, bravery, boldly going forth, energy, sometimes sexual energy. So when you take that kind of like malefic Martian energy and apply it in an emotional sense, the way this can look is that Scorpio is very interested in going into the deep, dark, forbidden places. So looking at things that are taboo or occult or forbidden for whatever reason, like you're not supposed to look at it. That's what Scorpio wants to look at and will potentially obsess about that. So fixed nature of the Scorpio fixed water is to like really get into what they're into and just focus deep down into it, sometimes obsessively. And this can also be a person, right? So sometimes they will want to go deep with another person. Water signs are quite oriented towards the emotions. And so sometimes this can be like maybe psychoanalyzing your lover or like going really deep in with them or maybe being obsessed with them or something. And this can be healthy and beautiful. And sometimes it's a little bit less of that, depending on the relationship dynamic there, of course. I think of Scorpio as the archetype of the witch or the sniper. And Mars, of course, as the warrior. Aries is our other Mars-ruled sign, and Aries as the fire version of Mars is exactly the way you expect a warrior to look. Front lines, energy, physical energy, aggression, going forth boldly where no man has gone before, all of that. Now, Scorpio, on the other hand, as a fixed water sign, is the sniper instead. So Scorpio is the type to just kind of sit back, unseen in the shadows, wait patiently, intensely focused on the target, and wait for the exact right moment to strike. And that's more of the Scorpio energy. Whereas Aries, if you're in a fight, will probably like knock you out in the first punch. Scorpio is more like maybe not going to come off as all flashy and aggressive and warrior-like, but if you've wronged them, they will never forget it. And they will take as long as it takes to enact their revenge. The fixed water nature is also, in a sense, holding on to emotions. So sometimes this can be holding grudges is another thing that sometimes Scorpio is known for. And another archetype for Scorpio is the witch. And so with this like mystical nature of water is sometimes like when you take that mysticism, but you add like kind of Martian nature to it. Like witches in mythology are not necessarily like good. Oftentimes the witch is like evil. And so this is like kind of taking that numinous power, but then using it. And that's kind of like magical in a sense. And oftentimes Scorpio people are very interested in witchcraft or witchy things. So the superpower of Scorpio is to never give up and to just dive in all the way deep and know everything about what it is that they love. And also they can be extremely strategic and effective, like for instance in business or in other type of competitive fields. They can be like really focused and strategic and like get things done. Especially if you have Mars in Scorpio, then that's kind of like long-term strategy winner energy. Mars is ruling Scorpio, so that's why it's extra strong to have a Mars in Scorpio. And it's opposite to Venus ruled Taurus, which is all about the sensual pleasures. And so sometimes a challenge for Scorpio can be to relax and just take it easy, have a nice time, enjoy life. You know, Scorpio is more like, I need to know everything, and just that intensity. They just tend to be really intense. So sometimes the medicine for Scorpio can be to relax. And then lastly, we have Pisces. So Pisces is mutable water. This is like the ocean, right? Water's nature is most naturally to be mutable. Pisces is the two fish swimming. Oh yeah, Scorpio is the scorpion. Another kind of symbolism for that armor, for that Martian nature. And also that kind of sniper energy where Scorpio can like it has that stinging power to it. Anyway, Pisces. So Pisces is the ocean. The two fish tends to, as a Jupiter-ruled sign, Jupiter is our planet of God, justice, religion, good luck, good fortune, abundance, big picture thinking. So Pisces tends to be very oriented towards justice, and it's especially mystical with this Jupiter energy, right? Water is already oriented towards kind of healing and mysticism, and even more so for Pisces. So Pisces is sort of the archetype of the mystic. And also people say Jesus was a Pisces, so that's a good example of kind of that Jesus energy, very much about compassion, empathy, love of humanity. And this is so beautiful and also can be quite overwhelming for Pisces because water, you know, struggles with boundaries, and like Cancer has a shell, Scorpio has a shell, Pisces does not. Like Pisces is just in that collective unconscious, in the collective imagination, feeling the collective emotional situation, like just very tuned in to others, the environment emotionally. And unfortunately, oftentimes, there is a lot of suffering in the world, and it can be hard for Pisces to not take that on. And so sometimes a challenge for Pisces can be like tending towards depression sometimes. But the superpower as a water sign, water's also quite creative. So Pisces tends to have like this really amazing artistic ability. They are so connected visually to this vision of justice, and it can be something that they do actualize through things like music or painting or other creative outlets like that. It's just like this superpower connection to the imagination, the imaginal realm, the collective unconscious, like where all of these beautiful creations come from. Another challenge though, right, is that this is not so oriented in reality. So water signs are always opposite to earth signs, and so earth is about like what is real and material and makes sense and is practical and the real nuts and bolts of what's happening. And so Virgo, opposite to Pisces, very good at all of that stuff. And Pisces, not so much. Pisces is not so inclined towards getting the mundane earthly things that they need to do done. They can be kind of like dreamy and sometimes a little bit lost in their gorgeous imaginations and feelings, and can sometimes just be overwhelmed with the felt experience of it all. The tides of emotion can just be extra kind of heavy for Pisces. So that's the basics of the watery nature of the water signs. And it's also interesting to note that the elements create a triangle in a zodiac. So all of the water signs, if you made a line between them in the zodiac wheel, would create a triangle. So every element repeats every 4 signs. There's 4 elements. They repeat after you get back to 4. So if you divide the 12 signs by the 4 elements, you get 3. Divides the circle into 3, you get a triangle. And the trine in astrology, which is 120 degrees, dividing the 360 degrees of a circle by 3, is the most harmonious aspect. So this represents ease and flow and just a very positive relationship between whatever planets that trine is happening between. And the reason that there's this flow for the trine is because the trine represents a relationship between 2 planets that have the same element, and planets that have the same element also have the same gender. Water signs are all feminine. So this is just representing that these 2 planets share those qualities. And in the ancient Greek etymology, aspect literally means to witness. So it's like these planets can see each other and they recognize in each other their shared nature, their shared watery nature in this instance, and also their shared feminine nature. And that is just the most easy quality of the 5 qualities I talked about that each zodiac sign has for the signs to connect on. It's easy for a water sign to see the watery nature of another water sign. And so this can be also kind of come up in synastry. So water signs, might get along better together, for instance. And then also if you have all 3 water signs present in your chart, specifically if you have one of the 7 traditional planets or your rising sign in each of the water signs, then you have a grand water trine. And this is a very auspicious, positive aspect pattern in astrology that represents basically that you have the superpower of water. You have every version of water, cardinal, fixed, and mutable in your chart. And what this generally looks like in real life is these people are healers. They have the healing gift. That is not necessarily something that they always will act on. Part of the thing about a trine is because it's so easy and harmonious, sometimes people take it for granted, and it's easy to sort of, not recognize or take for granted the things that you're naturally good at. So sometimes these people may not have like actualized that or may not be using that or practicing that, but that is something that is like a latent gift that they could actualize. And the way that they do that will depend on the houses that these planets are in and which planets they are. I personally would only look at the 7 traditional planets in the rising sign, but some people would say, oh, of course you should also include the outer planets. Of course you should include the asteroids. Of course you should include the angles. So because I'm a traditional astrologer, I don't. But if you do have a grand trine with one of these other qualities in the chart, you could still look into it and see if that feels resonant for you. And I think I'm going to do a video at some point where I break down how to analyze what your unique gifts are if you have this aspect pattern, and what parts of life you are gifted in, what problem you solve in connecting these three parts of life that represent the houses that the planets are in, where your grand trine is happening. So look out for that if that's you and you want to learn more about that. So I think that's about it for today, but of course, leave me a comment if you are Cancer, Pisces, Scorpio person. Let me know if this landed for you, if you have anything you want to add about the watery nature of these signs. Of course, you are the authority if you have these placements, so do let me know what you think. And if you ever would like to talk to me about your astrology, I do offer consultations, and there's a link in the description where you can book a reading with me if you would like for 60 or 90 minutes. I offer a reading where we just go over the birth chart as a symbol for who you are, and also one where we can get into the timing. That's the longer reading, so that way we have enough time to really talk about the year ahead and career peaks and things coming up in your future. So, and if you live in Philadelphia, then I do teach in-person workshops at the time of this recording. I'm living in Philadelphia. So, oh, and at the time of this recording, it is December 2025, and I'm running a sale on digital gift cards, so you could gift your friend a reading or just get a gift card and 20% off and then use it for your own reading if you want. So there will also be a link below for those in the description. This is a really fun gift to give someone, a gift that they cannot throw away and they will not forget. And what is better than gifting someone the gift of self-understanding and cosmic connection? Come on! Definitely reach out to me if you have any questions about any of that. And thank you so much for being here.